let's get this shit started. Hello! Welcome to my channel. My name is Celeste. I am an avid book reader who just has a lot of thoughts about the things that she reads. Today, we are going to be covering House of Sky and Breath. We're going to be doing a summary as well as a review. If you haven't already, go watch my first video where I covered House of Earth and Blood. Again, did a summary, then a review of the book. And if you have already watched that, you probably are noticing that my setup has gotten drastically better from the last time you saw me. First, you can actually see me. It's not just my phone, and I'm not holding a microphone, so that's really exciting. Let's just get into it. If I could describe this book in a short way, I would say it definitely feels like a book.
You know, my favorite thing about the movie is like it feels like a movie. Yeah.
And this book, after I finished this book, was the reason why I felt like I needed to vomit all of my words out, because I didn't know how to process how I felt about everything that I had read. And even still, a lot of the details are a little fuzzy for me, but we're going to try our best to do this summary. So let's get into it. Let's summarize this book. So our book begins with a prologue that doesn't follow any of the characters that we know so far. It follows a human woman named Sophie Renast, who is in like a death camp trying to find her 13-year-old brother, Emile. What we know about Sophie so far is she can switch between being human and veneer because she has made the drop. And Sophie's been at this death camp for like literally 2 weeks and has not been sniffed out yet by the guards, who are known as dreadwolves, which are essentially wolves that are more dreadful.
Oh, you stink!
And so when we meet Sophie, when the prologue begins, she is actively escaping with Emile and like 9 other kids, because Emile, bless his heart, was like, well, if you're saving me, can you save these children also? And who's gonna say no to saving other children? You're not just gonna leave them in the death camp, of course. As Sophie is leading these children out of the camp, we learn a couple of things about her past, where first, their parents, Emile and Sophie's parents, were captured and killed by the human rebels. And in turn, Emile was captured by the human rebels and eventually ended up in this death camp. So, weirdly enough, Sophie begins working with the rebels, but not to rebel, but so that she can get information about where her brother is, because again, that's like her last remaining family member. And she has spent years tracking her brother down. Years, and has done a lot of stuff that she's not proud of to figure out where he is. And she eventually had to convince a commander whose name is Pippa. Pippa comes up quite a bit in this book, to let her go on this mission, which essentially is a little bit of like a suicide mission, because she could easily be caught at any time and killed. Or the rebels could just leave her there, because obviously the rebels didn't care about their parents. Why would they care about Emile and Sophie? Well, they do. Because, Sophie has information that she has not told anyone. She is the only one that knows this, and it is like war-ending information. It's information about the Asteri, and it could give the rebels quite an upper hand. Sophie is something that they call a Thunderbird. So the Thunderbirds were kind of like shifters, I believe, or some type of veneer where they could harness lightning. And they were so powerful and so feared by the Asteri that years and years, decades, generations ago, the Asteri tried to exterminate all Thunderbirds, and they thought they did. However, Sophie and Emil's great-grandmother, had slipped through the cracks and was able to continue on her legacy and eventually pass on the Thunderbird power to Sophie. So Sophie and the kids finally reach Agent Silverbow and their getaway car, and we also kind of learn that Sophie and Silverbow are kind of, I don't know if they're in a relationship, but they definitely have feelings for each other. They definitely have something going on. And they're making their getaway, but eventually the Dreadwolves, who are the guards of the camp, catch on to, 10-ish, 12-ish, actually, people are missing. So they're like, well, where the fuck did they go? So they come, they find the car, and they are just coming after them. And with them is the Hind, who we'll be calling Lydia. But the Hind, essentially, she was a part of Sandriel's, group or whatever, has done a lot of shit. Pollux, who was Sandriel's, second-hand man and, loves torture. The Hind, or Lydia, is, his girlfriend. So you can only imagine the things that she's done. And Sophie, so the wolves and Lydia are really honing in on this van to the point where it's either, everyone in the van dies, or Silverbow takes the kids to the boat that they're trying to get to, and Sophie stays behind to make sure that they get to safety. So they choose the latter, obviously, and Silverbow is run into this boat while Sophie unleashes her Thunderbird powers onto the Hind and the Dreadwolves. Silverbow gets to the boat, and unfortunately, Silverbow's veneer gets shot with a Gorsian bullet, which is kind of similar to the Crystallo's bite, where it hinders veneer powers. So he's essentially powerless and has all these fucking kids, and it's kind of like a dread. It's just dread filled everywhere because it feels like everyone's about to die until 4 rebel ships just emerge. And at this point, you're like, oh, everyone's going to be fine. It's the rebels. They only take Emil, the kids, and Silverbow. They do nothing to help poor Sophie, who is holding on her own, but not very well. The reason why Pippa, I should say, is leaving Sophie behind is because she thinks that Emil is also a Thunderbird. So, she's like, well, we have a Thunderbird if we bring Emil, and there's got to be a way that Sophie told Emil this information. So, is it really worth trying to save Emil, or trying to save Sophie, when all of these people that they're rebelling against basically have the upper hand? So they choose to leave Sophie behind, and of course Sophie is captured by Lydia, and before she is thrown overboard to drown and die, Lydia is interrogating her, asking her, we know you have some sort of valuable information. Who did you tell, and what is the information? And Sophie sticks to her guns and says, A, I haven't told anyone, and 2, I'm not telling you, bitch. And the Hind is like, you know what, fine, fuck it. Throws her into the ocean. So that is how our prologue ends. And we immediately jump to Bryce and her mother and her father at the Crescent City Ballet, where they have tickets to see Juniper, who is now the star dancer in a ballet, which is very great. And they're looking at this statue that looks a lot like Hunt, as Ember has pointed out. And so Bryce sends a picture of it to him. It's titled Making of the Sword in the Old Fae language. Now it's kind of just presented in this funny type of way, haha, this statue looks like you, but it's Sarah J. Maas. If it was introduced in the story, it will probably come up later. So just something to note, that there is a statue in the Crescent City Ballet that looks like Hunt, and is titled Making the Sword. So they're waiting for Hunt because Juniper is able to get tickets for Bryce, Hunt, Ember and Randall to come see her because it's like a cute little family. I don't know. But they're waiting on Hunt because Hunt is working. He still works for the 33rd despite no longer having like debts or is no longer a slave to an archangel. He doesn't have to kill anyone or any demons, but he still chooses to because in his mind, and it does kind of make sense, he's like, well, what other transferable skills do I have other than murdering? So who else is gonna hire me? Am I supposed to just work a 9-to-5 job when on my resume it says kills demons? Good at murdering? Very good at crime scene cleanup? He's also second in command, so we got a little bit of a promotion. And we also learn that Bryce now works for the Fae Archives, which she did get in part because she was revealed to be the Fae Princess. But obviously in the last book, Micah kind of blew Jezebel's cover, and obviously she had to move that library, and Bryce had to get another job. So now she works for the Fae Archives. Not as fun as Jezebel's little place, but gotta do what you gotta do when the city almost self-implodes. So, and Ember so gracefully tells Bryce that her relationship with Hunt is weird. Because it is. Bryce and Hunt, obviously, like, they basically confessed their love for each other last book. Maybe not verbally. I don't think they did it verbally, but, like, in their actions, they did. Like, Hunt basically killed himself to save Bryce. And Bryce basically tried to sell herself to save Hunt. So it's very well known that they have very strong feelings for each other. But they decided, in the stupidest way possible, to try and get to know each other better by banning themselves from having sex with each other for 4 months until the winter solstice. Which, on a juvenile level, yeah, sure, you can try and get to know someone outside of physical connection. But this is a Sarah J. Maas book, and it isn't done in no way well. Instead, for her characters, it makes Bryce and Hunt only think about sex because of how much they crave it. It doesn't, like, help them get to know each other better. It's not done well. And I'm with Ember until, like, it's very weird and kind of stupid. So, Hunt finally arrives. He's finally off work. And, of course, again, Bryce is, like, thirsting over him because he's in a suit. And she's like, oh, I hate this agreement that we made. Yeah, you guys are stupid. So the ballet starts, and we quickly learn that everyone just stares at Bryce and Hunt for obvious reasons. Like, they saved the city, but, like, in the weirdest way possible. People just stare. Like, this is how I imagined it. Like everyone in this ballet is just turned around and staring at Bryce and Hunt. Like, what? What? It's so weird. Anyways, because Bryce is also starborn, which we learned at the end of the last book, she has, like, this little star right in the center of her chest, between her boobs, that just shines whenever it feels like. It just does it. And it's, like, really bright, and it does it at the ballet, and it's, like, the most inopportune thing because it's dark in the theater and her boobs just start shining everywhere. That's kind of like our introduction to the book, and it quickly jumps to after the ballet, where we follow Bryce, Hunt, Juniper, and Fury, who Juniper and Fury are now living together, so that's very cute. And so we follow all of them to Rune's house, where there's, for lack of a better term, a frat party going on. Where again, it's kind of reiterated once more that Bryce and Hunt absolutely despise the deal that they made. They both want to break it, but neither of them want to do it first because A, that would be admitting defeat, and 2, the other person would make fun of them for all eternity, which both of you deserve to be made fun of for this terrible idea. We also learn, just by like conversation, that the new archangels to replace Micah and Sandriel have been chosen. So the first one who is replacing Sandriel is Ephraim. I believe I said that right. And he will be taking over northern Pangaea, which is, I think, the country that they're in. Or, yeah, that's the country. I almost said Midgard, but Midgard's the planet. And Celestina. Huh. Anyways, Celestina is taking over Crescent City, which Hunt has admitted, he's like, I haven't heard too many bad things about her, but she's going from overseeing a population of like 50 people to an entire city. So think of it as like a tiny little town in like North Dakota to taking over like New York. It's a little bit of a population difference. And he's had bad reputation with archangels thus far, so bad luck. So, of course, he's not too excited to meet her. He's going in with a semi-open mind, but he is still skeptical. Understandably so. I would be too. His last one tried to kill his girlfriend and destroy the world, so I think he's valid in that. We then switch. So this book loves switching point of views, sort of. It's all told in fourth person. It's all told in third person. However, it switches between character. So one chapter is Bryce, the next is Hunt, then it's Rune, then it's Therian, then it's back to Bryce, and then it's, it's like, we are losing the plot line, Sarah J. Maas. We are losing it, and I am losing it as I'm reading this book. So, it will make this summary slightly convoluted because we will be jumping in some spots. I just want to forewarn you before we go any further because we're doing our first POV jump. But we jump over to Rune, who is drunk and high. He is crossed and having sex with a fawn shifter. And at first you're like, okay, get it, I guess. And then you find out that he is officially betrothed to Hypoxia, who was the Med Witch, and the Queen of the Witches, she's both, from the last book, who we know that Rune has a little bit of a crush on. And he was like, well, I'm not officially married to her, and she won't talk to me, so I guess I'll just keep doing what I do. And Flynn, Rune's friend and roommate, comes to interrupt, and he's not even like remotely fazed by what's going on, by like the woman that is sitting on Rune's face, which tells me that this happens quite a lot. Comes to tell Rune that something is up with their like security system, and Rune leaves his room to go check it out. Only to come face to face with this blonde dude in his doorway, who we immediately learn that Rune knows, but doesn't like. Dun, dun, dun. And we learn that this man's name is Cormac. So Rune sees Cormac and he's like, why the fuck were you here? Cormac's like, what are you talking about? I was invited, cousin. And Bryce is like, I'm sorry, who are you? And Cormac just kind of turns to her and he's like, you don't know me, but I know you, because you are my wife, soon to be wife. Bryce is engaged because the Autumn King sucks. He fucking sucks. Again, he called Rune his cousin. Bryce and Rune are related. They are siblings. Half siblings, yes. And Bryce is engaged to her cousin. When did this become Alabama? Is that an outdated joke? Maybe. We learn why Rune doesn't like Cormac. And that's because before Rune made the drop, he and Cormac were kind of racing to find the Star Sword, and Cormac nearly killed Rune, like, over this. So Rune's like, first of all, you try and kill me to get this fucking sword. Second of all, now you're engaged to my sister. Weird. And Bryce is like, hold on. No, I'm not marrying you. Because A, you are my cousin. No matter how far apart, you are my cousin. And 2, I don't know you. And 3, why? Eventually, like, Cormac just leaves. He's like, I'll see you soon, my bride. Basically egging her on. And Bryce and Hunt leave the party because party is ruined after that. How does your party continue after that? They go home only to find Ethan, who is Connor's brother, bleeding inside Bryce's apartment. Before we get to Ethan, we hop over to Therian, who is like the merman, that kind of helped out a little bit in the last book. He didn't have a huge part, but he does in this book. And Therian works for the River Queen, and he has been tasked by the River Queen to find Sophie's body. So already our prologue is coming back. So if you skimmed the prologue like I did, you got very confused very fast. He has been tasked to find Sophie's body because he learns that she was thrown overboard on a boat. So they're trying to find her. And it's pretty well known that Sophie was a Thunderbird. So it's been like 2 weeks since the prologue occurred. And Therian has to find her remains, basically to confirm that she's dead. We also learn that Therian is engaged to the River Queen's daughter and has been for 10 years. Also, we never learn what the daughter's name is. Like, ever. She is still just River Queen's daughter the entire time. So that's fun. And the reason that they've been engaged for so long is because Therian was horny. He was so horny and just wanted to take her virginity and like was literally like on his knees saying, I will marry you. Just let me put my dick inside of you. And now he's been trapped for 10 years. So Therian's been put in horny jail, essentially. He eventually finds the lead blocks that Sophie was supposedly tied to and find that they are empty. And the like cuffs that held her were not broken, but unlocked. So our mystery aspect has begun. Where is Sophie's body? And where is her brother? That is our mystery. So the River Queen has tasked Therian to A, find Sophie's body, or find her alive, and find her brother. Because again, it is known that at the very least, Sophie is a Thunderbird, and speculated that Emil is also a Thunderbird. And both would be very valuable to anyone who finds them. Anyone. We jump then back to Bryce and Ethan and Hunt, where we learn that Perry, who is Emil's younger sister, so Emil again is the new alpha of the pack, and her little sister, who I think Ethan and her had like a little bit of a thing, dropped Ethan off at Bryce's apartment because that was kind of the only place that she knew to give him. Because what happened was Ethan was kicked out of the pack because he spoke against Sabine. Sabine was questioned about Bryce's actions during the attack. And basically Sabine like downplayed it and was like, Bryce did nothing, stop praising her, whatever. She basically just was talking shit. And Ethan was like, no, like Sabine basically did nothing. She was out, at the summit, and I was fighting alongside Bryce, and Bryce did all of that. And Sabine obviously didn't like that because she's a bitch and beat the shit out of him and kicked him out. And thus, now he is here in Bryce's apartment. Bryce despite like all of the turmoil that has been in their relationship, agrees to let him stay because obviously he has nowhere else to go. And Bryce has Ethan sleep in the same bed as her just to keep an eye on him because obviously he's fucking bleeding and like battered. Hunt is a little baby about this and is like, why can Ethan sleep in Bryce's bed but I can't? Well, Hunt, it's because you guys made a stupid decision and decided to have basically no contact. So while they're laying in Bryce's bed, Bryce tells Ethan that during the search, Danica told her that Connor and the entire pack held off the Reapers for as long as they could to help Danica stay with Bryce as long as they could. She relates that they saved Bryce, essentially. So there's no bad blood between Connor and Bryce. So she was kind of like, so I don't see why there has to be bad blood between us. Ethan just kind of relays to her that Connor loved her more than anyone he's ever known, and that he truly thought that Connor and Bryce were mates, and that's why he was so upset. We also learn a little bit about how mates work in this, because obviously it's not as like everyone is either fae or human. Like you have fae, shifters, humans. So every like shifter or veneers has a different view of how mates are perceived. So like shifters, they think it's like a true love type of deal. Fae, it's like a soulmate almost. And for angels, it's like marriage. So each of varying levels. So we jump over to Rune, who is chewing his father out about Bryce's engagement. And the king, in true assholiness, just basically says, well, A, it's not your fucking problem. Focus on your marriage. And 2, Bryce will be at that altar, whether she likes it or not. And the Autumn King basically says that, you know, you're engaged to Hypoxia, but the late witch queen, Hecuba, I think that's her name, Hecuba has 2 daughters, Hypoxia and the Hind, so Lydia from the prologue. We also learn that Hypaxia's father was not Lydia's father, so they're half siblings, kind of similar to Bryce and Rune. Hypaxia's father was a powerful necromancer, and that's how she inherited his gifts for necromancy, and she also inherited her mother's, while her older sister, Lydia, was the product of a shape-shifting male who was a stag and their witch mother, but Lydia didn't inherit any witch gifts and was handed over to her father's family. So we kind of enter the next morning where Ethan and Hunt are kind of having a little argument. And essentially Ethan tells Hunt that Connor loved Bryce for 5 years, and it took him that long for her to agree to go on a date with him. Basically telling him, good fucking luck, buddy, because after your 4 months or whatever, you're still not going to get anything out of her. Bryce, in this time, is talking to Jezebel about Cormac, basically trying to get some info on him, and Jezebel just says, you know what, it probably won't be the worst thing ever to marry him. Hangs up the phone call with Jezebel. She's at work right now, I forgot to mention, when Cormac just appears. Basically, just to, like, poke at her a little bit. And when he shows up, her, like, star starts to shine again, the same way that it shines, like, mostly around Hunt. And he is, like, pushing at her buttons and is like, oh, it's because it knows that we are meant to be together. We are predestined. And Bryce is like, yeah, okay. And Cormac's like, no, like, when I went to the Oracle, she told me that I was destined to unite with a princess with a star in her heart. He goes, that's you, babe. And essentially, that they're mingling. So Bryce and Cormac, according to the Oracle, they're like mingling or work together is supposed to bring great prosperity to their people. We switch over to Hunt, who is with Isaiah and Naomi as they are meeting Celestina. And so far, things are going good up until we learn that half of Sandriel's unit will be joining theirs. So that includes Pollux, Pollen, Sandriel's second in command, who again is like a sadist, basically. And Baxian. So their like nicknames were the Hammer and the Hellhound. That was another thing about Sandriel's like unit, was that they all had fucking H's. So Hunt, Harpy, Hind, Hellhound, Hammer. Why? It's so hard to keep track of. Obviously, Hunt and Isaiah and Naomi are like, you're fucking kidding me. You are kidding me. This is a joke. Pull out the cameras. We are being punked. Spoiler alert, they are not being punked. Punked does not exist in this world. And so Baxian has a nice scar on his neck from Hunt. So we know that there's some bad blood there. Because whatever Hunt did to him was bad enough to scar. Like, Baxian has veneer, and they heal pretty well, but he has a nice big old scar that Hunt gave him. So whatever happened was not good, and whatever happened between him and Pollux was terrible, because Hunt just barrels through and just tackles Pollux and just starts beating the shit out of him. In the midst of that, we learn that Baxian's name, the Hellhound, is because he has a certain, a rare ability to shift into a hellhound, like a dog, I think, which is rare for angels or whatever. But like in the middle of Hunt beating the shit out of Pollux, they're like, by the way, Baxian is pretty cool. And so Hunt gets put into like the dungeons or like a jail cell. So Hunt and Pollux get put into like separate cells to keep them apart, and also as like timeout for fighting. And Bryce has to come pick him up and is basically like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, why are you fighting people on your like, why are you fighting people? Come on. So Bryce literally has to like pick him up like a mom picking up her child from detention. And Pollux is like trying to egg on Bryce and Hunt, mostly Hunt, by calling Bryce a bunch of names, basically just calling her a whore and a slut and stuff, which Bryce hears all the time, so obviously she's not really fazed, but it does piss Hunt off. We hop over to, after Hunt is bailed out of timeout, we hop over to Therian, who is working on getting into Sophie's email to kind of find out if there's any leads on where she might have gone. And he finds an email titled Dusk's Truth, where she reports that she's trying to gain access to something. And there's another email chain called Project Thur. So Thur is like a thunder god or something. And I believe, I didn't put it in my notes, but I believe the statue at the beginning of the book was of Thur. Don't quote me on that. Therian's just kind of looking through these email threads and finds that the person that she's emailing has a very suspicious email. And he tracks it down, and who else but Danica would be emailing Sophie?
Oh, Lord. Again. A fucking again. Nothing new, nothing changed, same old shit. Same old fuck.
A rebel. And so he finds out that these emails were, they were swapping emails for up to 6 months before Danica died. This book is just essentially learning how much or how little Bryce knew about her best friend. Therian, after finding this out, is like, okay, well, let's keep searching. And he gets a report that there is an abandoned boat outside of these marshes. And on the boat, there is a life vest that smells like a human boy. Emil. We learn that through this kind of investigation that Pippa, I almost called her Sophie, Pippa ordered her, like, squadron to find the boat and the boy. So it is believed at this point that Emil escaped and is now kind of on the run. And so Therian orders his officers to also try their best to find the boy and find any trace of him and bring him back. After Therian orders his officers to basically go out and find him, he comes to Bryce's apartment, obviously to ask her about Danica's involvement with the rebels, to which Bryce is like, no, I didn't know. I don't know a Sophie. I didn't know that Danica was doing this. Why? Why are you asking me this? And Therian reveals that it's because he wants to find this 13-year-old boy, who is Sophie's brother, and get him to safety. Because the rebels are after him, probably the Asteria are after him, and now the River Queen is after him. And so Therian is essentially like, I want to find him first so I can get him to safety. And Bryce is like, well, that is very noble. I also want to do that. To which Hunt, if you remember in the last book, Regulus, who is an Asteri, called Bryce and Hunt and basically told them, you are safe so long as you stay out of trouble. And Bryce, essentially with finding this boy, is getting into trouble. And so Bryce is like, let's leave it alone. Let's not do anything. Hey, like, remember, we will be murdered if the Asteri find out that we are causing trouble. And especially if we are causing trouble with the rebels. So this is probably not the best idea, Bryce. To which Bryce is like, I'll think about it, but my mind is already made up. So Hunt and Bryce are now kind of at a little bit of a standstill because Bryce wants to help this boy, and Hunt does too, but he's also more concerned with preserving the life that he now has with Bryce and the life that they could have together. So again, they're at a standstill. And we kind of leave it at that and jump over to Rune. And Rune, I believe he arrives. He's there. Rune's there, I guess. And we kind of just jump a little bit and learn that the reason why Rune doesn't really like Cormac is because when he was 27, Declan was bragging that Rune could find the Star Sword. You know, he could do it. You know, no one else can get it. And so Cormac's dad was like, okay, go get it. So they're like, fine, we will. So Declan, Rune, and Flynn went out to the cave, and Cormac's dad was like, all right, Cormac, you go get him. And so he sent out Cormac and his two twin cousins to literally hunt them down in the caves. All of them get lost in the cave, but eventually Rune obviously finds the Star Sword and is able to pull it out, which deems him like the Starborn Fae. So Cormac, who really wanted to be the Starborn Fae, he had researched it for so long, lost that title to him and didn't fulfill his father's commands. And so Rune is like, be very careful around Cormac. He literally tried to kill me. Bryce is like, well, I don't like him anyway, so of course I will. And Rune is also like, you are also harboring a fugitive to the wolves, Ethan. So you should probably have him stay with me because Sabine hates your ass. And she's like, maybe you're gonna have to ask him. I have bigger things on my plate. Now that Bryce really wants to save this boy, she meets with Fury because she would like to get some more information about where might this boy be, because Fury is some unknown being, so maybe she knows something. She's powerful too. Where this boy might be, and why was Danica in contact with a human rebel. Fury doesn't really give too much about Sophie or Emil, but she does reveal that Danica is something that is called a bloodhound, which essentially is a special kind of wolf that can sniff out family bloodlines. It's Sorry. And the only reason why Fury knows this is because Fury and Danica had, like, dirt on each other to keep each other quiet. So Fury knew this about Danica, and Danica knew something about Fury. That we don't really know what about Fury Danica knew. It's kind of theorized that it was probably Danica could kind of sniff out what Fury was because of the Bloodhound power. I assume that Danica maybe sniffed out what Fury was, and Fury was like, well, how did you do that? So they now have dirt on each other, or had dirt on each other. We continue on, and the governor, or Celestina, tells Hunt that his new partner is Baxian. Again, Baxian is the Hellhound who has a giant scar on his neck from Hunt. And she's essentially like, show him the ropes, show him how to do the job, show him the city, just please don't beat the shit out of him. And so Hunt is obviously a little disgruntled, and Sarah J. Maas just kind of leaves it at that, because we hop over to Ethan, who is talking to Therion and says that Danica was a history major, and she had told him about all this research she was doing on something that could land her in a whole hell of a lot of trouble. She never told him what it was, but whatever she was researching, very dangerous. Whew. The jumping between people only gets worse from here, so I'm sorry. Because we are now jumping back over to Bryce, who is meeting up with Rune, and Bryce relays to him, that she just learned about Danica being a bloodhound, and they're like, well, we need to go tell Ethan and Therion, where they arrive to find this soft white cat that Ethan is fawning over, like quite literally head over heels for this cute little cat. He's like holding it. He's like, Bryce, when did you get this fluffy, beautiful baby? And Bryce is like, hi, Adis. And Adis just starts talking, and Ethan's like, what the fuck? Just like drops the cat. And Adis, who is like a prince of hell, is laying into Bryce about not learning her powers yet. He is like, why are you not doing anything about your powers? You literally have the same powers as a Starborn queen, the last Starborn queen, Thea. He's like, you probably have her powers and you're just sitting on your fucking ass, not doing shit. He basically reveals that the Starborn queen, Thea, was like the true Starborn Fae. Prince Pelias, who in the history books is like the Starborn Fae, was not even a prince. He was the high general in Thea's like court. So he essentially appointed himself prince and forcibly wed Helena, who was Thea's daughter. And by the time that happened, like, Thea was dead. Pelias was had killed her and stole the blade, stole the Star Sword. And so Idis tells Rune that the sword that he has actually belongs to Bryce, because it belongs to the female heir of the Starborn power, who is Bryce. And so we also learn that Helena, where it was previously believed, I think, that she was just dead, which it was previously believed that Helena had died, we learned had gotten away and vanished, and no one ever learned of her fate. So it's no longer confirmed that she's dead. She very well could be alive, or we either learn about what she's done or if she had any heirs or anything. And so Bryce is still just kind of like, what the fuck is going on? Like, why are you telling me all of this? And Idis essentially says, you are the Starborn Queen. You are the Starborn Fae. And you are doing nothing to stop this war that has been going on for like 15,000 years. It's like an endless war. And he's essentially like, the time is now to make a move. Hunt is there too. I forgot. Literally everyone is there, like Therion, Rune. And so as Adis is telling this, he's talking to Bryce, but everyone else in the room, everyone in our little squad is there. We've got Ethan, Therian, Hunt, and Rune. Everyone is there. And so Hunt butts in, and he's like, well, why are you telling us this? Hell is our enemy. And so Idis very graciously asks Hunt, who wrote that in the history books? Who wrote that? Only for them to kind of realize that, oh my gosh, the government rewrites history? No way, that has never happened, ever. So essentially, he reveals that the Asteri forced scholars and philosophers to write down their versions of the event and erased Thea from the record. Essentially, write down what we want you to, or else we'll kill you. That's how it went. And so Idis tells Bryce that when she is ready, Hell will be on her side. He basically says that whenever she's come into her power and she's ready to fight the Asteri, she better call Hell, because all hell's gonna break loose. Ha 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 ha. And he further is like, if you want to work on your powers and end this war, you need to work with the human rebels. And Bryce is like, you want me just to go find a human rebel? You think that's a good idea? They hate Veneer. I'm gonna die. And he's like, you know a human rebel. And she's like, who? Who the fuck do I know? And he just points behind her to find Cormac in the doorway. And he, like, Idis just goes, hey, Agent Silverbow. So Agent Silverbow from the prologue is Cormac, the one who was like in love with Sophie. Yeah. So after dropping quite a bomb on our gang, Idis just leaves. He's like, well, my work here is done. Wipes off his paws and just bounces. And so Cormac's like, well, cat's out of the bag. He's like, what do you know? What do you know? Like, you were talking to a prince of hell about an uprising. What do you know? Bryce is like, well, we're not telling you. How do we trust you? And he goes, I know you guys are probably looking for a meal. I am too. He's like, I was close with Sophie, and he helped her free Emil. And he's like, I have no ill will to find this children. There is no ill will in my body when it comes to finding this child. I promised Sophie I would find her brother and I would keep him safe. And they're all like, oh, you were a simp for her. That makes sense. Well, here's everything we know, dude. Here you go. Yeah, it's a completely different day. I got distracted. And, yeah, that's it. I literally got distracted and forgot I was filming a video. So, anyways, let's continue. I believe I left off with Cormac showing up after, Idis pays everyone a visit in his little cat form. So, we're just gonna start there. I hope that's where I started. Essentially, we find out that Pippa is an absolute psychopath. She kills babies. She kills children. She's fucking crazy. And we learn that... And Cormac kind of relays a lot of the information that we already know about Sophie through the prologue. Obviously, our main characters don't know that. But he just kind of relays the reason why she was with the human rebels... why she went to the death camp, how Emil got to the death camp, what happened to their parents, yada, yada, yada. They all learn that stuff. We already know that stuff. Cormac essentially is like, I want to find Emil before Pippa does, because again, Pippa is fucking crazy. And Therian, who, if you remember, is conducting a search for Emil and also technically Sophie, because no body, no crime. She has not been found. Relays to Cormac that, hey, we are also looking for Emil, but we are also kind of looking for Sophie because we have not found her body, so she very well could be alive. Cormac turns to Bryce and he's like, so You probably know by now that Danica and Sophie knew each other. And Bryce is like, yeah, and what do you know about this? And Cormac essentially just kind of confirms that since he knew that Danica and Sophie were close and Danica and Bryce were very close, that was one of the big reasonings behind him agreeing to the engagement with Bryce. It wasn't to piss Bryce off. It wasn't, my bang is getting in the way. It wasn't to piss Bryce off. It wasn't to, consummate an actual marriage. It was just because he knew that Bryce might be a great source of information to find out and whatever he needs. So, I don't know. That didn't come out properly, but I've had a lot of caffeine today. I have this entire coffee, okay, and I had a V8 Energy. Really, that's it, but that's a lot for a Monday. Usually I don't drink coffee on Mondays. I usually go to bed after work, but I don't know. So, for obvious reasons, Bryce is like, okay, well, if you knew Danica, what do you know about her? What have you learned? And Cormac essentially says that Danica had suspected something about the Asteri for a really long time. We don't know what it is at this point in the book, but he basically says that Danica needed someone to go to the Eternal City and confirm her suspicions. For obvious reasons, Danica, who is an alpha of a pack and a very well-known person, could not do it herself because she would very easily be caught. And so she kind of recruited Sophie to do it. And this was like 3 years ago, so about a year before Danica died. Sophie was tasked with going to the Eternal City, confirming Danica's beliefs. However, Sophie didn't complete that mission, for lack of a better term, until after Danica had passed. So, whatever information Sophie learned at the Eternal City for Danica was the information that she died with after escaping from the death camp. But again, it's still, just as described earlier, it's something huge, it's something war-changing. It could change the course of everything if people knew what this information was. And so Cormac also says, I believe, because Danica knew that she was going to die eventually because of all the research she was doing, she might have set up a safe place for Emil and Sophie. He doesn't know where that is, but he was hoping that by becoming closer with Bryce, he would be able to have someone to kind of bounce ideas off and figure out, like, okay, well, where do you think Danica found as a safe place? Where can we find Sophie? All that kind of good stuff. And Bryce is starting to kind of think in her head. She's like, okay, well, maybe Idis sent Cormac for a reason. Obviously, we know that Cormac was very well versed in the Star Sword and Starborn. He researched it a lot. That's why he was so adamant about being Starborn and basically was willing to kill Rune to get the Star Sword. So he knows a lot about it. And Bryce is essentially like, well, Idis just got on my ass about not, honing my powers, so you must be the reason. He must have brought you to me as well. So they cut a deal with each other where Bryce's end of the deal, her part of the bargain, is I will help you find this kid. I will help you find Sophie if need be, and all that kind of stuff. But I want out of the marriage whenever I want. I get to call it off. And Cormac is like, okay, I like that deal, except I want to agree to call off the marriage or the engagement or whatever after he's done helping with human rebels, because he needs a reason to be in Lunathion and search for all this stuff and help the rebels. And currently his kind of excuse to be there so often is Bryce. So they agreed to that. Someone was barreling down the street. So they agree to those terms, and before Cormac leaves, he turns to Rune and is like, hey, I need to talk to you about something. I have kind of an extra task for you. So after Cormac leaves, Rune leaves, Bryce and Hunt are like, well, we got to go to work. So they start to walk their ways over to the 33rd and the archives and stuff, where Bryce starts to wonder if the two email chains that were between Danica and Sophie, Dust Truth and Project Thur, she starts to wonder if Dust Truth is connected to the Lightfall Squadron, just because of those parallel names. And she wonders if Project Thur, who Thur was the thunder god, could be related to Thunderbirds, and trying to learn more about Emil's powers or Sophie's powers. And she's just kind of turning this over when Hunt eventually turns to her and he's like, hey, I don't really feel comfortable with this deal. He's like, I have, understandably, he has been through a lot. He went through the initial war, kind of failed miserably, became a slave, and he's like, the battlefield is not a place that I want to be again, and it's definitely not a place that I want you to be. He's like, I don't want you spying for the rebels. I don't want just the possibility for the Hind to come after us, to give the Asteri a reason to kill us. And Bryce is like, I understand, but I feel the need to find this kid, because Bryce kind of understands what he's going through, being alone without anyone, because after she was kicked out on the street by the Autumn King, she felt alone, and she was about the age that he is, 13 or something. And she's like, I just feel this need to help this kid, and we can do it separate from Cormac and Therian and all of them. We can do it on our own. She's like, but I want to find this child. And Bryce essentially is like, she reveals that Fury and Danica kind of had this, not really a deal, but they both knew something dire about the other person. And, my nose. They both knew something very dire and, a huge secret about each other. And for some reason, Bryce is like, that could be our thing with the Asteri. Girl, they will kill you. They don't want, to be blackmailed. They will just kill you. But whatever. Maybe I am just pessimistic, but I feel like that's not a good plan. And I think deep down Hunt knows too, but he just goes along with it. I think because he cares for Bryce. Because Hunt says that he would love to see a world without hierarchies or the Asteri, but he isn't as tied to it to the point where he would feel okay dying for it. He was like, I'd rather be there to see that than to give my life up. So he's not quite up to the level of martyrdom that Bryce might be at. I think this scene, I liked a part of it where Hunt was being very vulnerable, but I didn't like Bryce's response where she's like, well, I understand that you you've done this before with Fail, but I think we should do it anyways. And yeah, it just it felt kind of stupid, for lack of a better term. Her idea doesn't make sense. There's no way in hell the Asteri would allow them to just have blackmail on them. They would just be dead. So whatever. And then it ends with Bryce telling Hunt that she doesn't want to wait until the winter solstice to end their bargain. And they are in an alleyway at this point, because remember, they're walking to work. They just kind of start making out in public, which they stop because they're like, oh, people might see us and think, I'm engaged to Cormac, and that's not good. I think you guys should have stopped anyways, because no one wants to see that. I hate PDA. I hate watching people in public do PDA, because I'm like, I didn't consent to watching you do that. Ew. I'm fine. I'm going on a tangent, but I feel like it's fine to hold hands and hug and give a little kiss, but when people are making out in public, get a room. Get a room. Anyways, we hop back over to Ethan and Therian, who are still at Bryce's apartment. Therian is relaying to Ethan about how Micah and Sindriel died, confirming that Bryce and Hunt both did very notable and noble things during that kind of downfall. And he kind of says, I think you would be a really great asset to us because of your sense of smell as a wolf. And he's like, if you decide to help us, come to me. I have some tasks for you. He's like, I think your sense of smell would be great for finding this kid. And Therian leaves and just kind of leaves Ethan to his own lonesome So he does what any normal, like, 20-something-year-old does. He finds Danica's sword and just starts absolutely whipping it around the apartment, and is just, like, going full, like, child in their own, like, imagination. He's fighting demons in Bryce's apartment. And he gets up on Bryce's nice, I imagine it is glass. I don't know if it's actually glass, but her nice, like, coffee table. And he starts, like, swinging the sword, and Bryce, who comes back because she forgot her work identification, her badge, and right as she opens the door, the coffee table just breaks underneath Ethan.
Oh no! Our table! It's broken!
And this is one thing that is so, like, weird about this series, is that Bryce seems like someone who really likes that clean aesthetic. Like, I think of, when I picture her apartment, even if it's not been described this way, I picture things I picture them how I want to picture them half the time. I imagine her apartment as, like, white walls, like, light wood floors. She's got a nice white couch. She's got this beautiful glass coffee table. Everything's that, like, light wood. She likes that, like, bright, clean aesthetic. That's how I imagine it. And she constantly has these, like, sweaty, bleeding, dirty men in her apartment just messing everything up. And of course, like, Ethan, of all of them, has to break some of her shit. And of course, like, Bryce is like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, you just broke my fucking coffee table. And she's upset for a hot second until they realize that coffee table had a secret compartment in it. If you remember from the last book, Bryce got this apartment from Danica. Like, it was in Danica's will. Danica had it furnished. She put all the furniture in there. It was set up for Bryce. So this secret compartment was for Danica, from Danica for Bryce. And inside of this inside of this secret compartment, compartment, Jesus. In this secret compartment is a bunch of, like, papers that Danica wrote, including documents, there's images, there's newspaper clippings, and all of them regard First Light and how they're used. So First Light, when it comes from the drop, is kind of used as, like, a way to power the city. It's almost like taxes, I guess. It's like veneer tax. Danica's research was about how First Light, I don't know what's happening to my voice, about how First Light is used for more than powering the city. Actually, that a lot of the First Light is used to power weapons. Feels pretty close to the American government, if you ask me. And a lot of them also kind of covered theories about who the Asteri are, where they came from, and essentially, a lot of these theories are like, as much as we know about the Asteri, we only know it by, like, word of mouth, and just by basically trusting the Asteri. Like, everything that they know about them has been told to them by the Asteri. So, obviously, there's no, like, fact-checking, because all you have is just the Asteri telling you where they came from. There's one, like, paper in there that's titled Dusk's Truth, but it's blank. Whenever Danica wanted to write about Dusk's Truth, she did not get to it for obvious reasons. So after this, we hop over to Rune, who is meeting with Cormac, as Cormac requested. Cormac tells him that Sophie was an informant for the rebels, where she communicated via, like, this crystal radio or something with someone who is close to the Asteri. At this point in the book, it's theorized that this person might be one of the Asteri, but that's just kind of a theory. They're not one of the Asteri, I'll tell you that one. Essentially, like, what they would do is, or what Sophie would do is she would use this crystal to talk to someone named Agent Daybright, and Daybright would give them information about what the Asteri were doing, so that the rebels kind of had an up, just classic, like, war stuff. However, because it was like a radio, and even though they were talking in like code, it was pretty easy for people to, for lack of a better term, like hack into the radio. I can't think of what it's called, or like not eavesdrop. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like what is it called? Intercepted. It was pretty easy for someone to intercept the radio call and to like listen to their codes. But they're hoping with Rune's ability to mind speak, maybe it'll be a lot safer communication between him and Daybright. So Rune is now kind of the like middleman, the messenger for the human rebels. This is when we also learn about some of Cormac's history with the human rebels. He linked up with them about 4-ish years ago, and he's technically something called a field commander, which essentially I think just means he's a spy. And that Sophie was one of his agents, so Sophie was under him. Cormac gives Rune this like tiny little small quartz. That's what he's supposed to be contacting Daybright using. Rune's like, well, what the fuck am I supposed to ask about? What do you need me to talk about if you want me to contact her like today? And Cormac just says that Daybright and the rebels have been trying to coordinate like a hit on something called the Spine. It's like a railway, and it's like a huge supply railway. So a lot of times the Assyri will put all of their big supplies on this railway because it cuts Pangeria in half. And he says that the Assyri there's whispers about it, have been working on some type of mech suit prototype for Veneer pilots. So he's like, ask her about those, see if we can get any intel. And finally, Cormac says that he thinks Danica might have told Emil and Sophie to find refuge in the Bone Quarter. We hop over to Therian, who is with the River Queen's daughter. And she kind of comes up to him and she's like, you know, what are we doing? Like, you engaged or proposed to me because you want to have sex with me, but we haven't had sex. And it's been 10 years. They've been engaged for 10 years. So she's starting to assume that he's getting bored of her, which, like, truth be told, yeah, he is. But he understands that the minute that he breaks this off with the River Queen's daughter, he's kind of fucked. So he, instead of offering to have sex with her like she was kind of requesting, he offers to have a double date with Bryson Hunt above, so in Lunathion. I'm pretty sure he like refuses to have sex with her because he's afraid that it'll like consummate the marriage. Like once he does it, then he's like locked in. Right now in like the engagement stage, he still technically could break it. But the River Queen's daughter agrees. However, she has to go ask her mom first. So that's weird. Like, I'm pretty sure she's an adult, but whatever. Then we hop over to, it's a little bit later in the day. It's a lot later in the day. It's nighttime. And we are with Bryce and Hunt, who, again, have both agreed to call off their agreement. And they are now laying in bed, Bryce's bed. Again, within this apartment is Bryce, Hunt, and Ethan, who is couch surfing. This is when Bryce gives Hunt the old razzle dazzle with her mouth. That is about all I'm going to say about that, because, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what to call. I don't know. She gives him head. She gives him head. And he finishes. And they plan to do more. But Ethan, again, who is a wolf and has good hearing, yells, "Please have sex a little louder." I didn't hear everything that time. Which, valid. It's like, I understand that he's staying at Bryce's apartment, but no, people don't want to hear that. Ew. And Hunt just kind of like waves it off, and he like tells Bryce that he's going to fuck her senseless. Again, Ethan, of course, hears this, and he yells, that sounds medically dangerous. And Bryce just kind of laughs, and tension is killed. Ethan has successfully killed the boner, and Bryce goes to bed, Hunt goes to bed, Ethan can sleep semi-peacefully after being traumatized. So now that everyone's asleep, Hunt is having, like, I guess a dream, or it's kind of like a lucid dream, where he's being approached by Apollyon, who is the Prince of Pit. He's also the Prince of Hell that killed and ate an Asteri, so he's known as the Star Eater. He, in this dream, has Hunt tied up, and Hunt is like, dude, what the fuck? Like, what? You couldn't just, we're in a dream. You couldn't just, like, ask me? And Apollyon's like, well, you should be able to get yourself out of that if you use the gifts in your blood. And Hunt is a little confused because he's like, I do use the gifts that I have. Jesus. I do use the gifts that I have. I have the gift of lightning, and I use it all the time. And Apollyon's like, he's kind of hinting that Hunt has a lot more power than what he thinks. Apollyon gets, like, really mysterious randomly in the middle of this, where he's like, my father is the void. He is the being that existed before chaos was his bride, and he's like, you are wasting the gifts that I have given you, or that we have given you. He's like, look at Bryce's powers. You would be surprised how similar your powers are, and what could happen if you put your powers together. So at this point, I was like, is Hunt like a demon or something? Like, we don't know anything about his father. We know nothing. So I was starting to theorize in my own head, and it's not confirmed in this book at all. It's still just a theory. I was like, maybe Hunt is like half demon or something, which I think would be an interesting parallel, because obviously with angels and demons, having someone who's both, kind of an interesting play on like the fallen angel that I think he was supposed to be in the first book. I think that would be an interesting play on it, but it's not confirmed. It's just simply a theory. We hop over to Rune, who's trying to use the crystal that Cormac gave him, and he's trying really hard, and then he finally hears a female voice, and she appears to him as like just a flame, like a pure flame. And Rune, who this is his first time doing it, so he's no spy, but he's like, ah, shit, like, am I just out in the open? Like, you can see who I am, but thankfully, I don't know if it's like subconsciously or Daybright did it, but he is covered in like the night sky, so he's completely anonymous to her. He also is like, oh shit, I haven't thought of like a code name, so Daybright gives him Agent Night, for, you know, the fact that he's covered in like stars and shit. He asked about the like spine attack or whatever, and Agent Daybright just tells him that there is safe passage, and Agent Daybright just tells him that safe passage is granted under the cover of a waning moon. That's it for their first meeting. We get more, but fairly short and sweet. We hop over to Hunt and Isaiah, who are having a meeting in Celestina's home. And there we have Pollux and Baxian, who are both absolutely beaten, bloodied, and bruised. And like, when I say beaten, bloody, and bruised, they are beaten, bloody, and bruised. Baxian's eyes are like swollen shut, and Pollux is like got black eyes and bruises all over him. And obviously Hunt is like, what the fuck did you do? And we learn that Baxian and Pollux were out at a bar, and Pollux, you know, not out of character, attempted to assault a woman. She was saying no. Pollux was not taking no for an answer, and Baxian stepped in and beat the shit out of him, which is good. Good on Baxian's part. But essentially, it is modern-esque times. So there's cameras and tabloids and phones and whatever. and people filmed their fight. And now it's all over the news that 2 agents in the 33rd were beating the shit out of each other at a bar over a woman, presumably. And Celestina obviously is pissed, and she's pissed at both of them, but obviously she can't back up that Pollux was attempting to assault a woman, but obviously there's evidence of Baxian starting a fight. So she initially was going to punish Baxian, but the Asteri called, and they're like, give him another chance. We have something better. And that solution is to have Ephirium, who was the archangel that took over Sandriel's territories, I believe, and Celestina mate, because obviously with 2 dead archangels, their ranks are a little bit malnourished, so they need some babies up in here. And they said that just the announcement of 2 archangels mating and having children should be enough to get this fight out of the news. Obviously, Celestina does not seem very happy about this. I wouldn't be either. But she announces that their mating ceremony will be on the autumn equinox. And everyone leaves, but Celestina pulls Hunt aside, and she essentially is like, hey, like, I know, or no. So everyone leaves, and Hunt is like, well, how do you truly feel about this? And Celestina obviously seems very not happy. I wouldn't either if I had to like be a forced mate of someone, but I guess that's just what comes with the territory of being an archangel. Because she seems, to me, it seems like she's like, this is like a necessary part of my job. She asks Hunt about how he feels about Bryce being engaged to Cormac. And he kind of says he takes it day by day. And Celestina kind of is looking at him, and she's like, you are exactly how I thought you would be. And he's like, what are you talking about? And she reveals that she was actually really good friends with Shahar, and that after Shahar fell and Hunt was in Sandriel's claws, for lack of a better term, that she actually tried to buy him. She tried to get him out of that situation 3 different times, but unfortunately the Asteri denied her all 3 of those times. We hop over to Ethan and Therian after this, who are, Ethan has agreed to start working with Therian, and they are at the scene they're at a crime scene where a Selkie female, and I think a Selkie is just like a water creature, not a mer person or anything, but it looks like that the Selkie was tortured in a way that whoever did it, let her bleed out until she gave answers. And presumably she died, so I don't think she ever gave any answers. But Ethan can smell Emil on her. So it's believed that she helped Emil on his way to Lunathion. And Ethan also smells a human woman on her, presumably Pippa, who was the one that killed her. So after this, we hop over to Bryce and Rune. We are almost done with part 1 of this fucking book. We hop over to Bryce and Rune, who are on their way to the training facility to meet with Cormac, when all of a sudden, a bunch of Reapers just come and knock the fuck out of Rune and take him into the sewer. Like, it just happens out of nowhere. And Rune can hear Daybright in his head, trying to wake him up, which is interesting because he doesn't have the crystal on him. And all he can think of in his dazed sleep state is he's like, I know your voice and I've smelled you before. And Daybright's like, no, you don't. But wake the fuck up. Wake up. Wake up. No, you have not. You don't know who I am, but wake the fuck up. And Bryce obviously runs into the sewer after him, and she finds that Rune is being dragged by 2 Reapers with 3 more behind him, and then 5 more behind her. So she's absolutely surrounded. And the Reapers say that the Prince of Pit sent them. They tell her that Apollyon is ready to strike, and he would like a worthy opponent. Essentially, again, kind of like what Ida said, telling Bryce to work on her powers. And he's like, you better work fast and hard because I am waiting and I don't want to wait for too much longer. And they also reveal that Apollyon is also searching the Bone Quarter for Emil because he thinks that Emil would be a worthy opponent as well. Because at this point it's believed that Emil is a Thunderbird. And of course Bryce is like, well, that's what I was on my way to do until you guys fucking interrupted me, idiots. And all of a sudden Cormac appears, like he literally just appears, and just begins attacking the Reapers. And he's like, use your starlight, come on, like, get going. And he somehow is able to get the Star Sword from Rune, tosses it to Bryce, and of course the Star Sword just erupts with starlight because it's in its presumably rightful owner's hands. And the Reapers are scared of it, because Bryce, like, immediately kills a Reaper, which is not supposed to be possible because these things are, like, undead, immortal beings. So you're not supposed to kill something that's already dead. And, yeah, she's like, what the fuck? When all of a sudden Cormac just grabs her and just, they disappear, and suddenly they're in the Ox training center. So, presumably, Cormac can teleport, or this is a Sarah J. Maas book, Winnow, I guess. That's what it's called in the ACOTAR series. I'm going to keep saying teleport because the word winnow is kind of stupid. Sorry.